So thank you everyone for joining today. This session is titled Women in the U.S. and Israel, Variety of Women in Judaism. It's the second session in the series about women in Judaism. And the first one was on August. And it was for about women in the Bible, and the next one will be in March. I'll talk about that at the end. But before we actually begin, I'm going to do a short introduction about what we're talking about. I'll have 3 questions to our panelists, and I will also introduce them very soon. And then we will have questions of the audience. So feel free to use the chat, and it's now open to everyone. So feel free to use it. And we'll ask those questions properly at the end of the session. So just a little self-promotion and general stuff before we begin. As you know, just please try to stay muted. Feel free to use the chat. This session is being recorded, so for whatever reason you do not want to be seen with your video on, so you can feel free to turn it off now, because I will be putting it on YouTube afterwards. And another thing that I just wanted to share is that from December 2nd for 8 weeks, I will be leading an adult ed class called Jewish History 101. So if this panel is interesting to you and you want to learn more behind the background of development of Jewry from antiquity up until the foundation of Israel, more or less, then you're welcome to join me. So I'm going to put that link in the chat right now to everyone. To the link to B'nai Israel, so you can check it out. There is a fee, but it's because you really have to be in all 8 classes, and I'm putting a lot of effort and time into preparing content and materials, but I obviously highly recommend it. So feel free to check that out afterwards as well. Okay. So with that, we will now properly begin. I also want to say thank you to the Sisterhood and the Men's Club for cooperating with me on this series of Women in Judaism. And they have helped me share the information and been supportive about this series as well. So I want to thank them. And now, before I actually ask the questions to our panelists, I want to share a short PowerPoint presentation talking about the background and what exactly we are talking about when I actually say the variety of women in Judaism, and why that is interesting regarding that comparison. So I want to just take a step back and talk about, when we are talking about the spectrum of Judaism in the US and in Israel, what are the differences, that we see initially. So first of all, starting from the US, I hope you see that it says the Jewish American religious spectrum. We usually ask people regarding their religious affiliation. So from the left side, it goes from ultra-Orthodox to Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionist, just Jewish, which I had to put there because if anybody knows me, I did a whole project about people who call themselves just Jewish, and unaffiliated. So we really have, this is the general spectrum that's from ultra-Orthodox until unaffiliated. When we have the 3 central, Orthodox, conservative, reform denominations as very much a part of the definition in Jewish American religious world. However, on the other hand, we have the Jewish Israeli religious spectrum, which the only similarity is basically that they both have ultra-Orthodox groups, and I apologize for my spelling mistake. Clearly there's supposed to be an R there. The spectrum that I based it off is from the book Jew Israelis, which Shmuel Rosner wrote along with Camille Fuchs in 2018. These are the definitions that people identify with today in Israel. So you have ultra-Orthodox, dati, which is religious, Masorti dati, traditional religious, Masorti and not so dati, so traditional but not so religious in observance, and then completely secular. So in this case, you can already see just from the names that the religious spectrum is very different, because the conservative and reform denominations are not part of the definition that you would find within Israeli. But however, as we know, being a part of the conservative movement in B'nai Israel, that there is an Israeli Masorti movement. So how many are in fact belong to the Masorti and reform movement? So according to the book, 8% are reform, 5% are conservative, and 37% define themselves as Orthodox, whereas 51% of Israelis do not belong to any denomination. So it's really important to be aware of that. I do think that the numbers are a little bit higher for Reform and Conservative, and maybe Sigalit here can correct me, perhaps if she knows, or anybody else here if they know by chance, but it's definitely very low numbers compared to the US, that we see that, over 30 or 50% of people can define themselves as Reform or Conservative, although yes, many are unaffiliated, but it's unaffiliated from Conservative and Reform circles, and those are really the dominant denominations in the US. And the really interesting fact is that 51% do not belong to any denomination, but if we look back, you really have most people in that case in this middle section, that they are from the T to Masorti and not to the T. And that means that they're pretty traditional all in all. I think that's all I did, yes. So that's just a general background to have before we begin regarding just what are we talking about and what are the terms that we are using when in the US and in Israel, and how that kind of can affect from the beginning of the conversation, the terms and terminology and experiences that we deal with in the US compared to Israel. Okay, so with that, I will introduce my 4 incredible panelists today. And they will obviously, along in the first question, they will talk about themselves more as well, but I will introduce them right now. Okay, so we first have Avia Sagron. I hope I said your last name correctly. Is the Shlicha of the New Hampshire Federation. She is Israeli, born and raised in Kiryat Shmona, to parents who are from Morocco and Tunisia. Linor Shemesh is the relational and logistics maven at the Den Collective in Bethesda, and she's the registrar and program coordinator at Ramad Day Camp Greater DC. Linor grew up in Maryland to Israeli parents. Rabbi Dr. Sigalit Ur is a graduate of the Shalom Harmon Institute and Hamidrasha Be'oranim's Beit Midrash for Israeli Rabbis, where she received ordination in 2018. She was born and raised in Israel. Stacey Goodstein Ashtamker is a lecturer at Ono Academy College with experience in formal and informal education for the past 18 years. Born in the States, she made Aliyah and lives with her family in Modi'in. I think it's 18 years ago as well. But as you can see just from hearing a little bit of the introduction I did of these people, they are all on the spectrum of both that they know what's in the Israel, they know what's in the US, and they either have Israeli parents or born in the US and live in Israel. You have a mix of people, and I purposely chose people who had experience in both and knowledge in both, because I didn't want people in Israeli who's Masorti, who is surprised on birthright when he sees a woman wearing a kippah, for example, and that happens. That even if they're completely secular, the experience that we have in the U.S. is very foreign to them. So I purposely chose people who could know both the Masorti in Israel and the conservative lens in the U.S. And with that, I will ask the first question, which appears in the PowerPoint, and then we will begin with our panelists who will introduce themselves as well. Okay. Question number 1, do you believe yourself to be part of a specific denomination? What has been your journey to reach this definition? Okay, so with that, we will begin with Avia. So I'm going to put you on the spotlight and then mute myself. And feel free to also introduce yourself along with the question.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everybody. Toda rabba Netta. Thank you so much for inviting me. So yes, my name is Avia. Actually, my first name is Tchia. That it's a very religious thing in Israel to give you 2 names. I think it's changing between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, that it's also very interesting to see in the Israeli culture. And I grew up in a house, in a family that was Masorati Dati. I was traditional and religious. I kept Shabbat, kosher, everything. Until I was 14 years old, and I decided that I'm becoming just Masoratit. So today, I still am. I'm not observant as the way I used to be. I still keep kosher style, and I chose my own how I practice today. But when I arrived to the States, it was very interesting to me to see the differences. So, and Netta explained them very well. It took me a while to understand how to call myself, to introduce myself to people, because I am not secular. I'm not chilonit. Like I do believe, I have a big belief in God. I still keep certain things. And I find my Judaism in a very meaningful and deep place, but just not in the way I grew up in. So to me, it was a journey, and I'm only 25 years old. I feel like I have so much more to develop and where to go, and I think that Judaism will always be a huge part in my life, just not in the way, like in the traditional way. And that's funny because I'm a Masorti, that it's literally traditional. So yes, I think it just took me so much, like long time to really figure out. So today I'm like in America, I'm more observant, and I love to have this discussion and conversation with my own community here in New Hampshire, because I have the spectrum of the American religious, let's say. I have 14 synagogues that some of them are Orthodox. I have Conservative and Reformed, and luckily I really experienced each one of them. So I think, yeah, so today I am Masoratit, just not religious, not Datiya. And that's it. Yes, I think that's it.
Thank you. So you exactly are one of the descriptions that Shmuel Rosner and Camille Fuchs said, which exactly proves my point. So thank you. Okay, so now we're going to Linor, and I'll spotlight you now. Thank you. There you go.
Okay. Hi, I'm Linor. I am born and raised in Rockville, and belong to B'nai Israel, so go B'nai. I grew up in a family that we were conservative, and I would still consider myself conservative today. We, had Shabbat dinner, and I have 3 siblings, and we all go to the local JDS, the Jewish Day School. And so I grew up going to a summer camp, a conservative summer camp, that was like, we prayed in the morning and like before our meals and post meals and all that stuff. And so I would still consider myself conservative. I grew up going to shul on the weekends, and I actually now work for 2 Jewish organizations. So I think that my connection to Judaism is actually pretty strong, just because I have a lot of rabbis around me all the time. But I would still consider myself conservative, and I keep kosher, and do all the holidays and everything, but I'm not necessarily Shomer Shabbat. And yeah.
Thank you, Lino. Okay, with that, we're going to go to Sigalit, who will share her story now. Here you go. Thank you.
Hi, it's great to be here. I also have a daughter here, a Shlicha, in Gaithersburg. So it's always nice to see a glimpse into her life. And thanks for inviting me. So I shifted a bit. I was born to what we call in Israel a mixed family, meaning that my father is secular. He actually was a communist as a child, as a youth. And my mother grew up in a religious kibbutz, in a religious framework. And nowadays it's more common, but at the time when they got married, it was very uncommon to have this kind of a cross-denomination wedding. My grandfather, my mother's father, was not pleased by this match, but he wasn't really asked. And my parents discussed what they would do when they would have kids before they got married. You probably know that in Israel, the education systems are separate. There is a dati, a religious system, and then there's a chiloni, a secular system. And so you have to decide, to which system are your kids going to go? And they resolved that their kids would go to the Dati system, the religious system, the Orthodox. I mean, in Israel at the time, at least, Dati meant Orthodox. And be shomer mitzvot until the age of 18 and then choose. And I have two younger brothers. I'm now conservative. My brother is modern Orthodox, and my youngest brother is a secular Tel Avivi Bohemian. So it's like a nice spread through them all. And when I was 18, I continued defining myself as Dati, which meant modern Orthodox. And then basically after I got married and after I had two daughters, we were looking for a permanent place to settle. We'd been to graduate school in the States and then returned to Israel. And we were looking in a specific place in the Galilee. And one of the communities that we searched was Shorashim, near Carmiel. It's a village in the north. And it's the synagogue here is conservative. And I'd never been to a conservative synagogue before. But as part of our klita process, our checking out process, we were invited for 2 Shabbatot to come to Shorashim. And of course, I went to Shul. And it was very, very, very weird for me to hear women reading Torah, to see women leading tefillot. It was foreign on the one hand, but actually quite interesting and actually appealing on the other hand. And I thought, why not? And so we moved to Shorashim, and here I am, conservative.
And a conservative rabbi as well.
I should qualify. I'm not a graduate of a conservative seminar.
Okay.
The Beit Midrash, the seminary that I'm a graduate of, is what they call the Beit Midrash for Israeli rabbis. It's multi-denominational. So I'm privately conservative, but my smicha, my ordination is to Israeli rabbinate, not conservative necessarily.
Thank you for clarifying that. So it's very interesting, though, in any case. And now we will go to Stacey, who introduced herself. So here you go.
Hi, I'm Stacey. I want to thank Netta very much and thank Rabbi Mitchell, my own cousin. And whatever I say right now, I want to dedicate in memory to my mother, Arlene Goodstein, and Yabat Chana V'Moshe, who today she would have been 82, and she passed away 5 years ago. And she's really the one who instilled my love of Judaism and Israel. So I think that this is like very appropriate to be talking about this today. Okay, so the question was, where do we identify? And today, I identify with the modern Orthodox movement, or in Israel, Kippah Sruga, okay, the religious Zionist movement. That's really where my family lies. But I grew up in a conservative home, okay? I grew up going to a conservative shul. I grew up in a kosher home, but we ate non-kosher outside. We went to synagogue. We were very involved with the synagogue. My parents ran the synagogue, basically, years later. And my brother and I, we went to Hebrew school. We wanted to go to shul on Shabbat morning, and we all started to go. We went to junior congregation. My parents went to the main sanctuary, of course. And involvement in our family was, if my parents weren't home at night, they were in their second home, which was the shul, okay? And to me, it was a conservative synagogue. That's what I knew. We sat together. Women did not participate. Girls did not have a read the Torah for their bat mitzvah, though they were allowed to read a haftorah. They were allowed to do it at a havdalah ceremony or on Sunday morning, but not on Shabbat morning. Okay, and that was how I grew up. That was what I knew. That was what I thought was, I guess, normal for a conservative shul. On Yom Kippur, we always did the most. We didn't use electricity in our home. We always walked to shul. We didn't live far away, so that wasn't a problem. But and I liked it. I really liked it. I felt this connection. There was something there, and every Yom Kippur, I was always excited that was coming. At age 12, I, on my own, decided that I wanted to keep kosher. completely, not only in the house, but outside as well. And my parents were fine about that. And there were levels. I went, in levels. If we were at a diner, I would eat, a bagel, a tuna, maybe in the beginning, French toast. But then there were times, at a certain point, I wouldn't eat it all in those restaurants. Okay, so Kadima and USY, that became huge. I became extremely involved in Kadima and USI, and that was probably after our shul held a keynote, and my parents were helping with everything from making the food to setting up the tables to everything. And my friend and I were there. We were the little kids. We were like, probably like 10 or something, and we went to everything. We were at the dance, we were at the sichot, we were at the chugim, and we loved it, and we just knew that, we wanted to be really involved. And we got involved with Kadima and USY, and every time I was at anything for USY, encampment, kinosim, I kept Shabbat, because it was an opportunity. It was there. There was no reason not to. I always made sure that I told them that I needed to be in a house that was close to the shul, walking distance, because some neighborhoods are really, they're spread out. And I always got those places, and I went there. As I went on, I was very involved. I was on board. I rose from the chapter board to the divisional board, which I was president of a division, and I was on the regional board. And one of the things that you signed, whether it was true or not, was that you were actually keeping Shabbat. This was actually a real part of being on board. And I always questioned why synagogue boards didn't have this, and the kids were so much it was so much stricter. And I kept Shabbat. At age 17, I started to keep Shabbat, and I was alone. Now, my family went to shul, but they were not keeping Shabbat all the time. They were going out, on Saturday afternoon. So I was alone. I was alone, and I was living in a community where there were no other teens keeping Shabbat for sure. There were no other teens even going to shul. Okay, so it was just me. When I went on pilgrimage that summer of 17, and I was with a group from all over the United States, and I had people from California and from all over Michigan, this and that. And I saw these girls who they wanted to lead services. And I was like, what? This is USY. And, I'm also conservative. And I was taken because it was really the first time that I had seen that. New York was the last of the Mohicans. The New York shuls in the conservative movement were the last ones to change over, to accept egalitarian. And I didn't know this. It was not in my language, and I was from New York, from Queens. So this was, something that was strange to me. And I stayed with it. And when I went to college, I had friends who were observant, many that were also conservative, but at college, they wanted to go to Friday night services. They kept the spirit, not everybody was Shomer Shabbat, but it was a bit easier when I was there. I spent a year in Israel, and I came back, and very often I was alone, keeping Shabbat fully. And this really led me to a much more, to looking for a chevra, for friends that were doing that. And the truth was, I did not see that in the conservative movement. I did not see people in their shuls keeping up. I did not see places that I could go eat at. Most people didn't have kosher homes. And this really left me at a place where I knew that I couldn't. I thank the conservative movement so much because of it. I really feel that I'm a more observant Jew. But I felt like I didn't have a home anymore. That's the truth. And also, in turn, I married an Israeli Sfard who, was conservative. He had, great respect for my family and came to our shul and didn't have a problem with that. But as far as after we got married, it was like, no, Stacey, we're not going to a conservative synagogue. We're not. And I live in Modi'in, which is a very nice city that basically is comfortable for lots of different people living here, and different levels. I could, feel myself.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacey. So we're now going to go to the second question. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your personal journeys and your also personal definitions in that case. Now I'm going to go to the next question. And somebody made okay, never mind, I'll let this later. So the second question is, has your environment influenced your religious observance? And environment referring to where you are right now, so meaning U.S. or Israel. Okay, and we'll begin with Linor for that question. There you go.
So yes, my environment has affected. Like I said, I grew up going to a Jewish day school, so all my friends were Jewish, and again, I went to a Jewish summer camp, so all my camp friends were Jewish. And I mean, even I didn't become friends with non-Jewish people until college. So, but I'm still friends with like all my high school friends. And actually one of my best friends, we became so close because we both went to shul, and we, started sitting together, and just from there, we both went to school together. So from there, we were like, hanging out all the time. So my environment definitely has affected my Judaism. And again, I work for 2 Jewish organizations, so that also really instilled, like, 2 Jewish organizations that I like, my values line up with their values. So I think that because of that, I'm able to, like, I don't know, feel my connection even deeper than just going to synagogue and keeping kosher. So yeah.
Maybe I can just add as well regarding, I mean, I know both your parents are Israeli.
Yeah.
That have an influence, that was different compared to other people around you regarding your own religious definition, or, for you, you've always been conservative from day one, basically?
We've always been conservative. I think that growing up with parents who were Israeli and, family, I would go to Israel once a year, once every 2 years, depending on the years. And I think that it just, like, it added an extra, like, culture to me. So, like, that's the way I kind of, like, look at it. I think that, like, my culture is very Israeli. The way I say things sometimes, the way, like, sometimes, like, when I went to college, my friends were like, that's not the right way to say these things, and it's just because it's how I grew up. So, and yeah, my Hebrew is very strong, and just, it's like a cultural addition on top of my religious, like, being conservative. So I think that's the way I look at it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that additional definition. I appreciate that. And I very much relate to the translating things wrong. I do that all the time as well. Okay. And next we have Sigalit. So here, I'll put you on spotlight. Here you go.
Okay, yes. Thank you for those questions. You suddenly, when you have to answer a question, you start thinking about where things are, and I think I can say that the 3 main influences on my religious observance are my immediate family, the family I grew up in, and maybe my extended family, and probably also the yeshuv that I live in right now. Immediate family, as I described, since it was a mixed family, I think most people grow up in families that are either religious or non, and then they sort of, by default, just continue the way they grew up, and there's no question. And in my family, there was always a question. There was always an option. There was always a need to explain to yourself, and sometimes to people who asked you, why did you choose mom's way and not Dad's way. And I think naturally that maybe causes you to reflect a little bit more, to think a little bit more about what you're doing, to try and learn a little, to justify to yourself why you chose this path. So when we moved to the Galilee, we sent our 3 daughters to a Jewish Arab school, kind of for the same reason, because we thought that that going to a place where not everybody is like you really makes you reflect and think and ponder and think more deeply about your identity and in your choice in life. So that's the immediate family. The extended family, my grandparents came to Israel in the 20s and the 30s from Germany, and they were among the founders of 2 kibbutzim in the Beit Shan Valley, a very, very difficult place to found a yishuv. It's a place that's hellishly hot in the summer and not very pleasant in the winter. And we heard all the stories about the chalutzim, the pioneers who lived there. But the kibbutz that they founded was a religious kibbutz. And I grew up hearing those stories and being very moved by this, because classical secular Zionism has this dream of building a new Jew, returning to the land of Israel, but building some new kind of Jewishness. And religious Zionism, as embodied in the religious kibbutz movement, has this combination of the new Jew working the land, building, and so on, but also with a tradition of religious Judaism. And living on the land as they did in the kibbutz and working in agriculture, they had this opportunity to do all these mitzvot that just weren't possible, weren't relevant abroad. And so I was really moved by this romantic vision of religious Zionism as embodied in the kibbutz, and really saw myself identify with that. Even though I grew up in the city, I was never a member of the kibbutz, and I only spent a few months there at most. And the third influence is Shorashim, the village where I live right now. It's a small village, there's about 120 families live here. And as I said, the synagogue is conservative. And it was very foreign to me, as I said before, when I entered it, but it became more and more familiar and more appealing as I went every Shabbat to shul. And having grown up in Orthodox synagogues, I of course had no synagogue skills whatsoever, but in a small village, in a small synagogue, you have to step up and do stuff. And so I started by leading tefillot because I'm pretty musical, and so I could just do that. And then when it came time to learn to read Torah, first of all, my oldest daughter got to a bat mitzvah, and my mother taught her. Why did my mother know? My mother has never read Torah in synagogue, but when my brothers reached bar mitzvah, obviously my dad couldn't teach them because he was secular, and so she learned how to read Torah from her dad, and just in order to teach her sons. And so she learned how to read Torah, and she taught her sons how to read Torah, but she never read Torah herself. And then she taught her granddaughter, my daughter, who read. And then my oldest daughter taught Rotem, my second daughter. And I kind of listened in on the side and learned to read Torah, and then learned to read Haftarah. And now, I have all this set of skills that I never dreamed growing up in the Orthodox world that would be relevant to me. I think many people in Israel say that that Orthodox women, when they reach about the age of 35, when there's this mismatch between the status they've reached in the general world, whatever, they're not just starting out in their careers, they've reached some kind of a position. As lawyers, as doctors, as academics, whatever. And then there's this gap between the position they've reached in the general world and their positions in shul, which is always, behind the mechitza. For me, when I was 35, I was here in Shorashim, so it was just the right time to sort of move in to having a place in shul too, not just outside of it. So those are the 3 main influences that I can map out.
Thank you very much. It's so interesting. It's also family, but also really the environment in that case. Stacey, I'll put you on spotlight. There you go. Yeah, just
unmute. Yes. Okay. Okay. So yes, I also believe that the environment helps a lot. As I said in the beginning, my upbringing, my family. I came from a very strong home with tradition. So even though we weren't exactly, 100%, we weren't Shomer Shabbat or whatever, but the flavor was there always, doing the Kiddush and Motzi and having Friday night dinner always, always, always. Going to shul, and even if we got in the car and we went to Brooklyn to visit my grandparents, it was still, Shabbat was still there. Shabbat was always there. And holidays, my family, we were the only ones in our family who kept kosher. So everybody had to come to us for Pesach. There was no choice because we wouldn't eat anywhere else and nobody else was making a Seder like that. So that the environment that I came from, my home environment, played a huge part. I just feel like I was very drawn to Judaism, and it's because of the home that I came from, the home that my mother made sure that we had. And as far as I said before, basically, when I chose where to live in Israel, you choose a place where you're going to feel comfortable. And Modi'in for us was that place because it's a mixed city. So, and I come from, New York. I didn't need to feel like I was, I don't know, in a ghetto kind of setting. I could be with other people. I don't mind that my neighbors don't keep Shabbat, that kind of thing. But I have those people. I have a community. I have people who do keep Shabbat. There's always people there to have meals with, except for in Corona, of course. And it's a comfortable city for me because I don't cover my hair all the time and I do wear pants. And yet I have my group of people. And there are conservative shuls here, and reform shuls here, and Orthodox, and there's Orthodox egalitarian. There's lots to choose from. It's just that, we've chosen our path, and I've chosen my own path for my own reasons.
Thank you. And so really, both environments kind of influenced you in that case.
Yeah.
The childhood and where you are right now. And last we have Avia. Here you go.
And wow, you left me a lot to think about. And first of all, I want to say that I feel like I really relate to what Sigalit said about asking questions. I feel like for a long time now, I ask myself questions all the time, like why I keep doing what I'm doing, why I keep kosher, why I keep like why I love to go to Friday services, or like I really try like all the time to understand that, because I think this is like how you form yourself, your identity, and how you become who you really are. So I just wanted to say that I felt very connected to what you said. And I think that the environment really impacts me in two ways. So first of all, I'm here in America right now, and I grew up in Israel. That now I'm not taking anything for granted, like Shabbat in Israel, you feel Shabbat no matter what, if you are religious or not. You will go in the street and someone will tell you Shabbat Shalom on Friday noon, and here it's not happening. So you need to really work hard to keep your Jewish identity here in America, mostly in a place like New Hampshire, that it's not, like if I will go in Manhattan, I probably will even hear Hebrew. And that's something that for me really like made me appreciate my home, the place I grew up in, and my like in Israel, because I think I never thought about it. I never needed to thought how easy it to be Jewish in Israel. So like to feel it. So I think that's one thing that really like I found it very like challenging here in my life here, because I don't have my own family to do Shabbat. So how I keep Shabbat feeling, how I do Shabbat dinners. And I have to say, it took me like a while, but I figured it out. And today I can do Shabbat for myself, and I still feel the blessing and the kedusha and the holiness of Shabbat, because this is what I understand it's important to me. So America really, like to be here in the U.S. really helped me figure those things out. And also, as I said, I am very lucky shlicha, and I get to try so many different services and to go to diversity of synagogues. And suddenly I did aliyah, that I never done it, and I never heard about it. And my father would never like, even think that I will do something like that, because I grew up in a Masorti religious home. So for me, it was an amazing experience, like to try it. And I have the chance right now to figure those things out, to try new experiences. But I think most of all, you always need to be open to it. And I really try to do that. Like I always try to keep my head and my mind open to new things and new experiences. That the shlichut and to live in a different community and different and culture really helped me to do. So I really think this is like the like how the environment now and like the place I grew up in helped me to form my identity today.
Thank you, Avia. And with that, we're going to our last question, which I will share. One moment. Here we go. Oops, sorry. Go to the last question here. So this is the time for stories or any, short little tidbits before we go to questions from the audience. Have you ever been in the other country and changed your observance in any way? And what was that way? So we are going to start with Sigalit. Here you go.
Okay, so first of all, Rotem here asked a question in the chat that I think is relevant in this. How come I didn't encounter the egalitarian movements while living in the States? And I think it's somewhat related to your question, so maybe I'll answer it here. It does seem weird because now I know that most of the Jews in America belong to the egalitarian movements, and that the Orthodox community, Jewish community in the States is a minority. But as an Israeli who grew up in the Dati system, and when I grew up, the Reform and Conservative movements in Israel were a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of a community, really quite insignificant. I just hadn't heard of it. And so when I went to the States and I was looking for a synagogue, it was obvious that I was going to go to an Orthodox synagogue. And then one of my advisors invited me to his son's bar mitzvah that was held in Rodef Shalom Reform Synagogue in Pittsburgh. I don't know how many of you know that this is a very famous, important, significant synagogue, because that's the synagogue in which the Pittsburgh platform was framed, sort of the founding statement of the Reform rabbis in the United States. And I had no idea. I mean, it was a beautiful building. And I was a bit not intimidated, but I mean, I didn't know what to expect at all. But I went, and it was a very interesting experience. I remember just being flabbergasted by the mixed seating and by the chanting and by the English portions and by it was just. It's difficult for me to say now, but I think I can say that for me at the time, it was sort of like an anthropological experience. It was just so foreign that I spent my whole time just mentally saying, wow. And then went back to my Orthodox synagogue. I mean, it was just so different that it was really hard to relate. But I do think that experience, and when I was a kid going, I spent a sabbatical, my dad's sabbatical in Canada, and we went to visit a relative in Camp Ramah near Toronto, I think. And again, sat there in the forest, mixed seating in prayers there. And it didn't seem to register on a personal level, but then it must have been somewhere there, which meant that when I came to Shorashim, it was in the background and it wasn't so foreign anymore, and I could relate and I could find myself there. So I think my experiences in America, even though they didn't have an immediate effect then, somehow played a role in the fact that when I got to Israel and found my little America in Israel village, because many of the founders of Shorashim made Aliyah from North America, it's felt much more familiar than it would have been had I just, come straight from the army or whatever.
Thank you. I love when we get to the parts of the stories. I think it's the most interesting. So thank you. So Stacey, you are next, and I'm going to spotlight you. There you go. Just unmute, of course.
Unmute. Okay. Wait. Unmute. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, this question threw me a little bit because I was thinking to myself that I feel like I've pretty much been true to who I am wherever. Like, in other words, by the time I started keeping Shabbat, I actually had started before I even came to Israel, before I was ever here. And so I sort of feel like I wasn't doing different things. I don't know, I just was taking it with me and continuing. I suppose I've seen like a lot because I was a majocha for groups many times for teens, for USY, and also for some college groups. And I've seen the Israel phenomenon where Americans came to Israel and when they went back to the States, they came off the plane wearing a kippah, tzitzit, and how long did it last? So that I've seen. I've actually, seen that. I think for myself, from the time I decided I was observing what I was observing, it sort of just came with me. I'm comfortable. I can go to a conservative shul, and I don't, we've done it in Israel too. Our friends have invited us to bar mitzvahs, and we've gone, and I'm still, that's what I grew up in. It's not so foreign. It's not my choice of a lifestyle for now. So yeah.
Thank you. It seems that you have a unique story just because of the development of your own personal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Avia, I'm going to spotlight you now. Okay, there we go.
I think it's too early for me to say, honestly. I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. I think that for sure it will impact my life and the way I observe generally the world will be changed after 2 years here. And I think this way about any experience I have in my life. So I really don't know yet. But I do really miss certain maybe tunes in my prayers or the services and stuff like that. Now I know that it's more maybe Israeli. I like more certain Israeli tunes. So it finds me in a very weird places, but very specific and small. So yes, I don't know. I will get back to you maybe next year.
Maybe I can add to the question and say, you said beforehand that this was your first time that you did an aliyah. Is there anything else that you did that was different or new that you've done while you were here?
Yep. So I once I wore a kippah, but it also was something that I never done before. I think that I never been in a service with music, with an actual guitars and microphones and stuff like that. So yeah, I had variety of experiences there that I never tried before. And also I think that even Shabbat dinner I've been in so many in different houses that each one have different way to do it and different maybe blessing they do before the food or afterwards. And I grew up in a very certain way, to sing the Birkat Hamazon after the dinner. And So it's very, to me, it's fascinating to experience that, and I'm very, like, I try to collect more and more and more stuff, like places and experiences, because again, this is the shlichut for me. Like, this is what I take from this shlichut. Yep. So I think that's it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That added the tidbit that I wanted. Okay, Linor, you are last, and you wanted to add it from the previous question as well, so feel free to do that.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I mean, I go to Israel. Most of my family lives in Israel, so I'm there pretty often. But I don't. Other than like we've been to a wedding, my aunt's wedding, and that was like at a Orthodox synagogue, so it was like, you know, the women had to sit upstairs. But I don't think I've actually really changed have had that experience in Israel. But I think that I have had that experience here in America because I grew up conservative and all my friends were conservative and kept kosher and everything. I've had like experiences when I first went to school in Connecticut. I went to a school that had a lot of Jews. I went to the University of Hartford. And I, like, one of the first friends I made, she was Jewish, and later I found out that she was she was Reform, and I remember being like a little, not culture shock, because I know that there is different, like, obviously I know that some people are Orthodox and some people are conservative and Reform, like I know all that, but it was very interesting. And later in like my third year at school, I taught Hebrew school at a Reform synagogue, which was fine. And a family invited me over, I think for Rosh Hashanah or like one of the holidays, and the family invited me over for a meal. And I remember I called my mom and I was like, oh, like, it's so nice. This family invited me over. And she was like, well, do they keep kosher? And I was like, I don't know. And it was like in the first time in my life that I had to have this conversation of like, thank you so much for having me for dinner, but I only eat kosher meat. And like, I don't know what you guys do, whenever. And the mom was like really super nice and was like, oh, totally, like, I'll go get kosher chicken. But it was like one of those things where I was like, oh, like I've never had to have that conversation before. And also I went to, I think their Yom Kippur service, and like there was music, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I'm just not used to that. And also at home, we grew up my dad is Sephardic and my mom's Ashkenazi. And so we grew up going for the high holidays, going to a Sephardic shul that's walking distance from my house, which when I was younger was like fine. But I think as I've gotten older, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. Like I go because my dad likes it and that's what my family does, but it's very different for me. And like the women just sit in the back and talk, and like I cannot tell you what's going on in the services. So it's just because everything, like the tunes are different and everything is so completely different than what I'm used to. So I think like that's where I've had and I guess also in Israel, when we go to Israel for Passover, because my dad's Sephardic, my grandma makes rice, and at home we don't make rice. So I've had like a couple experiences like that, but
so I guess it's interesting that your background, your environment that's been influenced is actually U.S. more based rather than, U.S. Israel based. So like you're so much in the conservative world that those other experiences that are a little bit different make such an influence.
Yeah.
So those are all of my questions. I'll spotlight myself. Those are all of my questions, and thank you everyone for really sharing your personal opinions, beliefs, and practices and your journeys. It's really not obvious that people are so open to share. And I think I love learning about people generally. And I can talk to people for hours, which my husband really does not enjoy all the time. But I really appreciate you sharing yourselves with us. So with that, I will now open it up for questions. And since Sigalit already answered Rotem's question, feel free to either unmute yourself or write in the chat now if you have any questions for one of the speakers, for all of the speakers. This is your time to ask any questions.
I had a question for Sigalit.
Okay, and okay, here, I'll put you on.
About her rabbinical training. That it's not specific. Can she explain a little bit about that?
Yes. So I'm thinking where to start. I said I went to graduate school in Pittsburgh. That was in my previous life, which was in computer science, artificial intelligence. That's what I did my graduate school in. And I worked actually in IBM in the Haifa Research Lab for 10 years or so, working in high tech. And then really by chance, somehow I got offered an internship in Jewish education here in Shorashim in the village. And I thought, why not? And for about 10 years, I was here and there, 1 foot in the high-tech world and 1 foot in the Jewish education world, until I got up my courage to lift the high-tech foot and place both feet squarely in the Jewish education world. And I did this for about 15 years or so, until somebody said, you know what, you should be a rabbi. Have you ever considered that? And I thought, yeah, you know what, maybe you're right. And I actually went around and interviewed and was interviewed in the Reform school in Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, in the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem. And both places felt like not a complete fit. The Reform place was a very interesting program, but Reform is still too far away from my own personal practices. I'm on the sort of the right side of conservative, sort of on the border between conservative and modern Orthodox in terms of practice. So Reform was just a bit too distant from my own practices. And the conservative was very on point with my practice, but focused a lot on halakha, which to me personally is very important, and I see myself as observant halachically. But I thought that for the general Israeli public, halakha really wasn't so relevant anymore. And I saw myself as speaking to people who were not necessarily halachic, but still were committed Jews and who wanted to explore their Judaism in a more general sense. And then I went to see this third program, which belongs to the Hartman Institute and the Midrasha B'Oranim. The Hartman Institute, I guess people know it in the States, it's a very pluralistic kind of place. And the Midrasha B'Oranim is actually a very secular place that was founded by people from kibbutzim trying to explore their Jewish identity. And that mix and the program that was basically saying, look, we're not gonna try and churn out rabbis who are all going to be the same kind, the same denomination. We aimed to take in people from different denominations. And indeed, among the 20 people who studied with me, we had a previously ordained conservative rabbi and a previously ordained Reform rabbi, and quite a few secular people, and also some Orthodox people, including a rabbi. And so basically the aim of the program was to get together a group of people and build a common language, and then send them out into Israeli society. And each will retain their own religious identity, and each will work with their own community, but still be able to have an open channel to other communities and other rabbis, instead of walling off, instead of this experience that I had when I went to the States, just, keeping myself within the Orthodox world and not opening myself enough, I think now in retrospect, to the other communities and synagogues that were an option in Pittsburgh. So this newish rabbinical school is very new. It's now only in its third cohort. But I hope this this movement that we're building will have an effect on Israeli society in terms of opening up and creating cooperation between the denominations instead of competition and in some cases mudslinging.
But doesn't the Schechter Institute try and do that also?
Yes, but the Schechter Institute really focuses on training conservative rabbis for conservative communities. And even though there are many more conservative communities nowadays than there were when I was growing up, it's still a very small sliver of Israeli society. I know the numbers that Netta showed in the beginning said that 5% of Israelis define themselves as conservative. But I think it's a question what it means when you say you define yourselves as conservative. If that means that when your kid has a bar mitzvah, you go to a conservative synagogue, that's not a very thick identification, I think. And so I think the conservative movement in Israel is still very, has a very small influence. And I think there's something about the Israeli rabbis' Beit Midrash that is trying to open up, to outreach to more different nuances of people in Israeli society, to people who may not be halachically observant, to people who view their Judaism as more of a cultural thing, to people who view their Judaism as more of a national thing, and try to work with all these people to build some kind of an Israeli identity that is made up of very different kinds of strands, but it still has something in common. So I think the Schechter Institute is very important in strengthening the conservative strand, but I was more interested in the common ground aspect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. So I'm going to just ask if there's somebody has one last question, and if not, then I will let you go since it's after 2. Does anybody else by chance have a last question for any of our panelists? Okay. So you have my email if there's any other questions that you think of afterwards, and I have all of these people's contacts, so you can are always able to ask questions. But thank you so much for joining. I wish you already a Shabbat Shalom, an early happy Thanksgiving. And I hope to see you at my next sessions, which are happening in early December, the Jewish History 101 and the next Israel's Most Daring Operations, December 2nd and December 3rd. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye, everyone.